everyone. Welcome to Blackmere Live. We have our host and guest join us. Thank you. We have our founder and CEO, Domini in conversation with our guest, Ralph Mosios. And so I'm going to tell you a little bit about Blackmere Live and then a bit about them, and we'll let them get started. Blackmere Consulting is a talent acquisition and technical consulting firm. We place niche talent at thoughtful and interesting companies. We work with government agencies and companies across various industries, including healthcare and finance. We'd love to get to know you better, so please head to our website and sign up for our mailing list. We'd love to keep in touch. That is at www.blackmereconsulting.com. First, I'd like to introduce our host, Domini Clark. Domini is the CEO and founder of Blackmere Consulting, which she founded in 2011. She leads executive recruitment across a variety of industries with a functional focus on cybersecurity and data science. Under her leadership, the Blackmere team specializes in difficult to fill critical hires, including executive placement, data science, wireless research, and energy-related technical leadership. And we are so excited today to welcome Ralph Mosios. Ralph is the CISO of the Federal Housing Finance Agency, which he is going to talk a little bit about and introduce us to in a moment. He's a highly experienced CISO with a demonstrated history of working in government administration industry. He has a strong IT professional skill set in vulnerability assessment, NIST. Is it NIST or is it NIST? I'm revealing my non-security background. Yeah. Software development life cycle, IT audits, and information security management. We're going to be talking a lot today about zero trust. So please, we invite you to ask questions in the chat function at the bottom. So just drop them there as you think of them, and we'll ask Ralph and Domini in our last 15 minutes or so to answer those questions. So welcome to you both. Welcome to the audience, and let's get started.
Okay, excellent. Ralph, I'm so glad you are here with us. Thank you so much for taking this time.
Well, I am certainly delighted to be here. Thank you so much for the invitation.
It is an absolute pleasure. So I want to get started. Molly made a great little introduction, kind of the high-level overview, but I want to start with, how did you get where you are today? How did you fall into security, and what was that journey like for you to reach this level?
It certainly was a journey, just like many people before me that you've interviewed before, and I've heard a lot of people talk. It wasn't a straight path from a typical computer science degree or working as a firewall administrator. I kind of got to where I am through a roundabout way, and then it kind of changed over time. But I really started my career as an aircraft analyst working in the intelligence community. I did warfare analysis. Eventually, I moved into software program management. And then when I was a consultant for PricewaterhouseCoopers, someone saw my resume and said, "You're a threat guy. I could use you to do some cyber work." At the time, we didn't call it cyber. We called it information assurance and security. But that was right around 2002. And then a few years later, about out of the blue, a recruiter just called me and said, "There's a position open at the Securities and Exchange Commission for senior security compliance analyst," and got the job. Yeah. And then at some point, I became the acting CISO at the SEC for some time. And then a position opened up for my current organization called the Federal Housing Finance Agency. So been there ever since.
Well, and you have been there for some time. People do take different tracks. Sounds like your track really has been moving up through intel, through compliance, and now into this high-level role. Do you feel like that prepared you?
Well, you tend, no matter what job you really fill, you learn these soft skills, which are really important. We tend to talk a lot about technical skills, but, it's some of the soft skills that really, come to the forefront to help move you in your career. I think we could certainly talk a lot about this later on when we talk about leadership or whatever, but, being able to take technical jargon and translate that to plain English so people can understand what you're doing. Certainly cybersecurity is very similar to the rest of us in IT. We tend to talk about the technical things, but really, you have to be able to translate some of the technical jargon so people can understand what you're talking about.
Well, and particularly in an organization like you're in, you are working in a very complex environment with the FHA. Talk about this. Tell me about the organization itself.
Sure. So let me take a step back and let me talk about the Federal Housing Finance Agency, because I think it's kind of important to talk about our mission of what we do for the world. Because again, cybersecurity, we're down in the weeds trying to focus on requirements or projects, but I think it's good to hear about what the bigger picture is. Sort of to answer part of your question about how I got here. So my organization again is the Federal Housing Finance Agency, or FHFA, as you like to call us, and we're responsible for supervision, regulation, and housing mission oversight of Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and the Federal Home Loan Bank system. So that's who we regulate, and we spend a lot of time. I don't necessarily am involved with the regulated entities, but I certainly work with my counterparts at those organizations. So I do spend some time with them. So FHFA plays a critical role in promoting mortgage credit by ensuring liquidity for affordable housing, and we also support protecting the safety and soundness of the housing finance system. That's kind of the technical things that we do. But when you really look at all of these regulated entities, you combine them together, that constitutes about $8 trillion worth of mortgages. That's some pocket change.
Wow,
$8 trillion.
That's incredible. And I have to think that you've got a lot to protect there. So I always look at how cyber relates to a specific organization. What you're doing is very different than manufacturing, et cetera. $13 trillion in mortgages. That's a huge responsibility. That's a heavy weight.
The good news is I'm not responsible for the regulated entities. Those, we have bank examiners and we have other folks that spend some quality time with them. But we do collect some information from them, and we have to protect it just like we protect other sensitive information. So that's part of the things that myself, and then more importantly, the team, I have a whole team of folks that work for me that do really the heavy lifting. As a CISO, I spend more time in meetings. I don't do anything productive. That's why I have smart people to do the real work.
Who can actually get things done while you're in those meetings.
Exactly.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I experienced that in my own organization. So with that heavy load that you're working with the FHFA, where does this all, as you're trying to implement something as large as zero trust, this is a complex situation, a complex environment, and zero trust can really be a very complex implementation. The structure of it, understanding who has access to what now, and how you're going to change that. Talk to me about how this new CISA, these new CISA regulations are working for you, and how you're managing some of those challenges.
God, we could spend an hour or two just on that one subject, but so you make a very good point. It can be technologically challenging, but let me take a step back. Really, let me explain zero trust so we all have common understanding, because it definitely means different things to different people. So when I talk to people about zero trust, I like to use the phrase trust no one, no asset, no system, or no device. That's really kind of the core principles, which means you have to continuously authenticate users and these devices that I just talked about before, and you kind of alluded to that a few minutes ago. So one of the core principles again is when I talk to people, I use the words never trust, always verify. So that's going to have an impact, and I can get to the impact to end users a little bit later on, because I think it's really important to talk about that. But that's one of three principles. The other two principles would be assume that a breach has occurred, which means that we have some type of a threat actor operating in our environment. So there's things that we have to do there to identify who they are and then mitigate the risk. And the third principle is not necessarily a new principle or concept, but it really concerns implementing least privileged access. Again, it's not a new concept. It's been around a long time, but we really, as a community, need to do a much better job of restricting access to the minimal amount of information or access necessary to get the job done. So there's a lot there, and certainly you could peel back a lot of these different things, but there's certainly a lot of benefits to zero trust. And again, that's something that I could talk about. But implementing zero trust, I'll be honest, I don't think it's a significant technological challenge. And the reason why I say that is because I have a lot of smart people that work for me in the security group, but I also work with a lot of smart, intelligent people in other groups within the IT world, network operations, application development. So we all have to work together to really achieve zero trust. And the last thing I will say about zero trust, and it's not necessarily a project or program just for security. It's really, we need to all be on the same page with all these people I just talked about. Again, network administrators, operations team, application development, but it really needs to be a paradigm shift. And I think you talked about that earlier, about it's this big, massive thing that we have to do, but really it's going to require a cultural change in how we operate today. And really, you really need to impact, you're going to impact users. You need to get your senior leadership on board with the process because that's something that we all have to deal with.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. I think that's going to be one of the bigger challenges. I read somewhere that 80% of breaches are executed through login issues. So zero trust is supposed to really essentially solve many of those problems. How is there any evidence to say, or even speculation to say, all right, we're at this 80% rate, zero trust will take us to 20%?
I mean, with zero trust, again, one of the core principles that I mentioned a few minutes ago was assume that breaches occurred. So what are you going to do to deal with that? One, you talked about the logs. You know, we really increased our capability to capture the logs, maintain them for a longer period of time, use that for investigative purposes, as well as helping it to identify, anomalous activity. So it will certainly help. I'm not sure if it'll ever get us to 100% because that's really an unthinkable goal.
To your
but
point, I think it's really important to understand some of the larger challenges will be with users. I have a friend who likes to say security is hard, and that's why we're in the spot that we're in. So when we have to constantly validate, constantly input different passwords or biometric information, how do you suggest we reduce that friction on users?
Well, one of the things that I talked to my team about early on is we clearly understand there's going to be an impact to you. Again, it's going to require a cultural shift. How we operate today is going to change completely different. But if we could leverage technology to minimize the impact to users, right? Let's do a lot of the investigation and the detection behind the scenes so it doesn't impact users. Are we able to take some of our assets, whether it's a mobile phone or a laptop, and make sure it is compliant before it connects to the network, right? One of my pet peeves, and you talked about this before, was vulnerability management. I cannot underestimate the importance of spending quality time on making sure that your systems are up to date and patched. So one thing that we like to focus on is, again, vulnerability management. But if you could take care of those assets before they touch the network, you're in a better position.
Sure. How has the team embraced zero trust? It really is it's a shift for security teams, I think, because it's saying, you know what, we don't just have this network edge. We are figuring out all the creative ways to manage the data inside. That is a shift in itself. It's not just the users, it's the security teams and how they think about security. How has the team embraced it?
Well, I could certainly say that my team has certainly embraced it. We having to move away from what you just talked about was a traditional security model. Everything inside our perimeter is that trusted area. Now we're pushing everything to the edge. So we have to look at new technology, new capabilities, new policies of how we're going to implement some of these things. So I think the challenge, and again, this is something else that we could talk about, is really how are we going to get all these moving pieces to work together? In my world, I have a clearly defined path of what I need to do to comply with the Office of Management Budget Directive that you alluded to before. But, I have to work with the operations teams, the application development teams. They're busy. Trust me, I understand that they're busy. Just like everyone else, they have their own requirements. They're pushing out their own projects and their own tools. So we all have to be on the same page really to make this happen. And that to me is more of a challenge. And I think the technology, again, I work with some very talented people. I trust them. They do their research. They play with some of the tools that we have to procure before we acquire them. So they know what they're doing. But really getting to a common understanding of what are we going to focus on because we have a lot going on. And obviously this is something that you're quite familiar with since you spend a lot of time with recruiting and helping organizations recruit the proper staff.
Well, and frankly, one of the bigger challenges that we get to hear on a regular basis is that zero trust means more people. It requires more manpower. Of course, that's music to our ears because we love building security teams. But for someone in your situation, that is a big challenge, particularly when we're dealing with this cyber talent gap. What does that really look like? How are you experiencing that on your own team?
The cyber talent has been with us for some time, and it's only going to continue to get worse. A shortage of the cyber talent, getting the right people to do the right work. I really do think you need a mixture of different talent pool. Again, the way we conducted business, last year, years before, is going to change. So you really need to think out of the box, perhaps, if you would. Think about how can we do things more efficiently? Let's leverage technology where we can. So I'm always looking for some talent to help me move in that direction. So I like to tell my team, okay, we're here. We need to go over there. And when I say over there, I'm not going to say we need to turn left here, turn right there. You figure it out. You are the smart ones. You have your hands in it far more than I do. Let's chart a path to get there, and I will be there to support them. So finding the right people, and again, I'm very fortunate that my team I have a wonderful team. They do great work. But again, we have all these different priorities that we have to deal with. And on top of that, as a cybersecurity person, we always have to juggle what do we need to do to secure the environment, but also support the mission of the organization. We have a business to run, so we have to support our end users. They need their tools to produce just like everyone else. So we have to be there to support them. So we have to strike the right balance, and the key, I think, is getting the right resource to help us do that. And, I am spending some time on trying to hire some folks to help us fill some of those voids, but it has been a little bit of a challenge at times.
It always is. It always is. And that assures me job security, but it is a challenge, and it's not, to your point, not necessarily something that can be solved overnight. Unfortunately, without certain positions filled, it ends up stressing the team. Do you feel how do you manage that? How do you internally manage the stress on a team that's got some big challenges and not necessarily enough hands to manage all of it?
Well, it has a lot to do with prioritization. When you look at zero trust, one of the things I like to look at is, can we leverage existing technology so we don't have to go out and time and money and effort to deploy a new system and then learn a new system? So leveraging, the existing technology is sort of, I think, a help. We actually move in that direction in one particular functional area. But the challenge is really working, I meet with my team quite regularly, trying to understand what the challenges are. There's certain things that we're always juggling priorities, like I said before. We also work with our key stakeholders to understand what are their needs and trying to figure out, well, does this have to get done today to help prioritize, or can it wait a little bit? Or can you work on it part-time? But you also have to be, mindful of, you can't just keep, jumping between projects, because it takes a lot longer to complete a project if you're working on project A, project B, project C, and you're only working on part-time. Sometimes you need to lock yourself in a room and just focus on the task at hand. So it tends to be a juggling act, but you really have to communicate and understand some of the challenges to figure out what those issues are and help the staff, because again, they are bogged down
they've got full-time jobs. It's not just about this. Well, and you've got a pretty tight timeline too. So isn't it September 2024 that it's full implementation of zero trust?
Yeah.
Is that doable?
Yes. It is going to be a challenge. It's not going to be easy. Let me put it to you that way. And the directive that you're talking about is the Office of Management and Budget's directive, or OMB as we like to call them. They issued a directive in January of 22 called Moving the U.S. Government Toward Zero Trust Cybersecurity Principles. So the good news is they were pretty explicit of what we had to do. That's the good news. The bad news is they gave us until the end of September 2024 to implement all the security goals. That is a challenge. And again, going back to what I mentioned earlier, I don't really think it's a heavy or significant lift to do all these things. It's just a matter of juggling all the things that we have to do to keep the lights on and the business. That's the challenge. And the other side to this directive, it was yet again and not a funded mandate. So we had to take everything out of existing budget when this first came out and had to plan a little bit more for the future. I put in some placeholders for some potential tools that we had to investigate.
Okay. So it's hopeful we'll get it done by that time. That's challenging to not have it funded. I know that there are some new things rolling out as of this coming September. Wasn't quite sure what those new directives look like. Will there be funding coming your way? Will there be new or additional asks?
My organization, we're different. We're not like a traditional government where we submit our budget to the president and then gets approved by Congress. We're an independent organization, so we get our funding through fees levied upon the regulated entities. So I have a little bit more flexibility than some of my counterparts in other parts of the government, but it's always about, well, we need to keep the budget flat or consistent. So there may be some opportunities that I may have to shift some money around in the future, which I did this year and I do every year to get what I need to support the project. But it is going to be a challenge. Budget is always an issue for many organizations, many, not all.
I think that is the number one thing that I hear from CISOs is, how do I manage all that I need to do with a very limited budget and often limited staff? It is the hallmark issue for CISOs.
Absolutely. And we're all, no matter what industry you work in, we're all kind of facing the same types of challenges, the resources that you talked about, from people, money, and again, trying to keep the lights on and forward to support the organization, the enterprise. So that's something we have to deal with.
How do you feel like your organization is unique when it comes to
Well,
this?
like I mentioned, the funding is one issue that is, again, we're still concerned about it, but it's perhaps not as hard to get the money that I need. I can go back to the pool, in other words, when I need something. And this is what I did at the very beginning when this OMB directive came out. I talked to my leadership. I said, here's a new requirement that's levied upon us. We haven't planned for it. It was out of the budget cycle. The budget was already put in for that year, and I knew we needed some money. So I went to the senior leadership. I briefed them. Again, I explained what Zero Trust was in plain English, so they understood what I was getting at. And I said I needed some seed money to do some contract work to help us plan our path forward. And, sure enough, they supported me, and I'm certainly very grateful for what they did. Like, they listened, they worked with me, and they gave me some money, which was out of the budget cycle again. I just want to make sure that point comes across.
That's really important, and that shows great leadership. And it also shows great leadership on your part to be able to explain that in a way that gets the attention it needed. For sure.
Well, I will say that that's not just, they understood where I was coming from, but it's also that's not the first time I briefed my senior leadership on a quarterly basis. But, you have to go back and talk to the, senior leadership to keep them up to date on what's going on, because they understand, they realize back, in another year or so, you have to implement some projects and some technology and capabilities. So you have to go back and keep them appraised of what's going on. And every organization is different. You just have to find out what the cadence is, keep them informed. Some people want more information than others, but, you have to figure out what works best for your organization.
So I'm curious, there are people, I'm sure, on this call who are going through this exercise, Zero Trust exercise, but maybe not quite as far along as you are at this stage. What tips, tricks, buckets of muck that you stepped in that you could say, hey, don't step in this one? What advice do you have based on where you've already been?
I could talk about that in each of the 5 pillars. So one thing I will say, even if you're not a federal organization, a commercial entity, I would recommend going to CISO, the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. They have a Zero Trust maturity model that's pretty helpful of some of the things that you should be thinking about. Again, even if you're not a federal entity that is required to implement it, they do outline a good model, a framework for what some of the things that you should be considering. That's a good starting point. I will say that if people are just starting off, do what I did is, get some help. Everyone is busy, as I said multiple times, everyone is busy doing certain things. But if you get some contractor support to help you plan and figure out, well, we know what we have today, or maybe look at some of the technology that you could leverage to perhaps maybe do a small enhancement so you don't have to go out and buy a new tool. So that's another thing I would do, is really consider leveraging your existing infrastructure, which is something, as I mentioned before, something I did. And then the third, perhaps, recommendation, if you would be really to look at or implement Zero Trust as using a risk-based approach. So in other words, what new capabilities are going to give me the biggest bang for my buck? What is going to reduce? What is the biggest risk that I have to address? There's so many different risks that we have to juggle and address. Well, which one is really going to be the biggest reduction? And then, again, looking at it from a holistic perspective, you think about, can you get any short wins? Is there any low-hanging fruit that, to get a capability, it's not necessarily a big, heavy lift. So look for some low-hanging fruit to get the ball rolling, if you would. That's another thing I would certainly like to point out.
I love that. And I'd love to know an example of maybe a simple win.
Simple wins are not always easy, but one of the things that we looked at was, we've always looked at assets, and I'm not going to go into specific technology because I would stay away from what we do, but we looked at some of our assets and our inventories. And when we started to take a much, much deeper dive than we did in the past, we noticed that there were some vulnerabilities that were out there that we were able to remediate perhaps a little bit faster than we would have noticed had we not filled down any inventory. So that was, I would say, an easier win. One of the things that I tasked my team was to really, again, look at the existing technology. Can we leverage some of the technology? And we had a function capability that we really needed to implement. Well, we found out that, a tool that we currently have in hand with a small modification, we could support this functional area. So basically, I didn't have to go out and, again, procure a system, train people, of course, deploy it, et cetera. So that was a little bit easier. So I was able to take that money and put it someplace else where I really needed the money. So I think that was a quick win, that we were able to leverage existing technology.
That's helpful. And when you can use what you've got already, gosh, those small savings add up. A few of those, and you can do something big with that money later. Speaking of training, how are you training the users on that? I imagine that has to be one of the heavier lifts.
Well, training users is definitely going to be an item on our plan. It is already a discussion topic. So I've actually talked to my organization. I did a lunch and learn on Zero Trust. What does it mean? I didn't really get into specific details, but I certainly talked about what Zero Trust is. It's going to require a change in how we operate. So there will certainly be some training that we have to support later on. But again, one of my going in positions was let's try, we have to try really hard to reduce the impact to the general user. But you also have to communicate what's in the pipeline, keep them informed, talk about some of the potential changes because they're going to have to change the way they do business. But again, let's leverage technology where to streamline some of those processes. Let's automate the verification behind the scenes. So like you talked about before, you don't have to go on your phone and, using, typing a password or authenticating it through different mechanisms. So
yeah,
there will definitely be some changes.
Well, and I love the idea of biometrics in place of passwords. How secure do you feel like that next step is versus passwords?
Well, I am definitely a proponent of biometric. It was somewhat of a journey to get there, but we started with our iPhones many years ago, and nowadays, you can't even on some phones there's no fingerprint. So the biometrics there, but the facial recognition. And when we did some analysis and just pulled some studies, and the risk of a compromise of someone having like a biometric is infinitesimally small. So that's a risk-based decision that we thought would be better. Clearly, we're trying to get away from passwords just like everyone else. Now, you may not necessarily be able to get rid of passwords behind the scenes for like a service account or for another reason, but for the general user population, we're trying to streamline that process and make it easier for the users to get away from the passwords.
Yeah. Okay, so Zero Trust is definitely on your mind right now. What's also on the horizon for you? What's next?
More Zero Trust.
More Zero Trust.
I'm going to interrupt really quick just over here. We have a question in, and if anyone else in our audience has a question for Ralph or for Domini about Zero Trust or anything else cyber related. First off, we have from Denise. In your conversations, Ralph, with other CISOs in the government space, what common themes are you hearing both in terms of challenges and wins? What are like the overarching themes you're seeing there?
I do speak quite a bit with my counterparts, and particularly the financial regulators. So we're all dealing with the same type of challenges. We're really looking at the same different technology in particular. So some of the consistent themes are the resources. I just can't underestimate the point about the different resources that we have to do all the things that we need to do. There's one of my organizations that they really took a different shift on how they're implementing Zero Trust. Again, what I talked about before, security is kind of spearheading the Zero Trust, but I need to work with chief data officers. I need to work with, again, a lot of folks within IT. One of my colleagues, anything Zero Trust related, he took on, whether it was in someone else's functional area, he took it on. So he's able to move a little bit faster in some areas because now he owns it all and he can dedicate and reshift the priorities as he sees fits. So going back to the question, I think we're all in, when I say all, I'm talking about my counterparts at the financial regulators, not the regulated entities that I talked about before, but my counterparts, we're all looking at, everyone is in different stages. Some are more mature in some functional areas, but we talk about some of the tools and we leverage each other's teams. We've had a number of different working groups that we had a bunch of teams together to talk about either specific technology or a capability that we thought would be useful. So for all those people that are out there, leverage your counterparts wherever they are, because we're all facing the same challenges: money, resources, technology, cultural changes, what works. A number of people were able to share some of their architectural plans. So that was helpful. There's absolutely no need to reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of information that you should be leveraging from your counterparts. So hopefully I answered the question, Molly, for Denise, but.
So I'm actually, since Molly's having some challenges, I love that answer. And I think that it covered another great point of working together, that you don't have to reinvent the wheel here. There's a lot happening, and we can share some of the great things that we've put together. Bill also asked a question. He says, how do you encourage the hiring managers that report to you to consider candidates that don't always check all the experience or skills boxes?
Well, I'm going through that right now, but my team lead for a particular area, I actually sit on a panel, so I know who the candidates are, and we're on the same page. So we're looking for the right resource to support. And I don't want, I mentioned this before, but we tend to focus a lot on the technical skills, but for my organization, communication and those soft skills are so important because everyone on my team works outside of IT. In other words, they're talking to our end users. I know if someone has a challenge here, they need to be able to talk to them, communicate right effectively. So I also look for a lot of the soft skills. I think that's important
Yeah.
at any level.
Absolutely. And I think especially in such a technical industry, it's difficult to remember how important it is to be able to have a conversation and move the mark with your peers. Let's see. I'm looking through here too. Molly, you feel free to jump in because I know you can see these questions.
Yep. No, it was Stacy commenting that Hacker in Heels, they call soft skills leadership skills.
Even if you're not necessarily in a leadership position, we're all in leadership position. And I think do we have one more from Denise? Maybe not. Okay, so I'm going to look at my questions because I know, you've kind of answered this a little bit, but I'm wondering if you've got any good ideas for getting senior leaders really actually engaged and involved in Zero Trust Initiative. It sounds like you've done a pretty good job of that in your organization, but that might not be as easy in others. Any ideas for those out there?
Well, definitely communicate in plain English. I will say and I was able to leverage something that kind of happened without my knowledge. So when I briefed senior leadership of what I need going forward, a senior director stood up in this meeting and said, I teach at a school that had a compromise. I want to make sure that doesn't happen here. What do we need to do to help you be successful? So just by the fact that I was communicated in, what my approach is, what I need. So I had a champion in the audience. So again, go back and communicate, talk to your end users as well, not just the senior leadership, but talk to your end users. Start that mind shift change, the paradigm shift of moving to a different type of an operating environment. But the best thing I could do is communicate and leverage what I talked about before. Are there any quick wins that you could demonstrate? Hey, this is what we did to solve a problem that was part of this journey that we're on called Zero Trust.
I love it. Okay, so Zero Trust is really your baby, and it sounds like it's going well.
We have our challenges just like everyone else. And, wish I could double or triple my staff to make things move a little bit, but I have to do that with everyone in IT as well, because they're dealing with the shortages as well.
That's right. Well, we're here to help when you need us. Okay. Quick plug. Yeah. I am so glad you were here. I'm so grateful for this information. I think this is relevant, and I think there are 100 people out there looking to folks like you for advice. So I'm hoping that if you wouldn't mind, if folks can send us questions, we can get those on to you and we can share those out.
Absolutely. I would love to communicate. Again, there's just so much out there. There's no need to reinvent the wheel. And just because, again, we're doing business today doesn't mean we're going to be doing business tomorrow. So let's think about ways to be, innovative. So I really enjoyed our conversation. Very good questions from the audience and, of course, from you too, Domini. So I really appreciate it.
It's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you again for your time and your expertise. I will look forward to speaking with you again soon.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.